2018. And you may remember a little race called Congressional District 2 at the time. I started a few days before early voting started for that race, right? So it was basically underway when I started. And, kind of assessing the situation at the office, recognizing on the amount of dedication and the amount of work that the staff does at the county clerk's office is astounding. I walked in, and I've always been a hard worker. I've worked through, 3 degrees. You just work until you get the job done has always been my mentality. But these individuals, this staff, amazed and astounded me. But it was not necessarily a happy place because they were so overworked. So I knew there was some administrative stuff that needed to be fixed in terms of staffing and kind of morale and that kind of thing. And but what I first dealt with was the CD2 race, right? So the details had to be figured out later. And as you know, that ended up being a high profile race in which the results were not in the night of election. And the results ultimately led to a different winner for that race, right? They were unofficial results, but it was a different winner. So it ended up being much more high profile. And I was a little shell shocked. I can't exaggerate. And I've been in the media in a lot of different ways. I did media connected to mental health. I was a trainer. Being in the public eye on some level didn't necessarily, it didn't intimidate me. I was on the Board of Regents at NMSU during a time in which we had one of the largest budget cuts in the history of the university. So that in itself had its own controversy. This was a whole other level. And so initially I needed to figure out how well our office did elections. It seemed like we did a great job, but what I discovered over the course of the next 6 months after that was we do a great job. What I discovered over the course of that is we do not talk enough about New Mexico elections and how we have so many best practices in place that we are considered easily among the top 10 and arguably among the top 5 because of those checks and balances that we have in our system, because we have paper ballots, because we have an auditing process, because we have, community members on the front line of elections that administer them. There's all these things that we do. I had to learn everything I could about elections. And once I understood how well we did them, I've become a huge champion of them. It's not hard to champion something you so greatly believe in. And we have a Secretary of State that has administered elections for 10 years as in the largest county in New Mexico. So having somebody who's administered elections be our Secretary of State and being able to advocate on the finite level because she knows how it's done has been greatly helpful, right? I'm part of a larger team. Lindsay Bachman is my chief deputy, and she was on 6 months prior to me being appointed, and I was very grateful for her because I was able to hit the ground running. If she hadn't been there, it would have been a much more difficult adjustment to a really challenging time. And so I think we're a good team. There's this, and I said this immediately after the appointment, there's this idea that women could be competitive with each other, but I have found our leadership styles and the things that we do to be very complementary, and she's very detail oriented, and I'm very grateful for that. So being pro-voter and being on what I believe is the right side of the voter and taking a voter-centric stance is kind of who I am as a leader. I'm not a punitive person. I seek to understand. And so part of that is also understanding, why don't people participate? Why don't we have faith in the system? And I think we need to continue to have those conversations. So, I think it's multifaceted. Why do I have this perspective? Why do I want to head to Santa Fe and advocate for things? Why do I want to talk to you as a legislator and say, hey, you know how that thing in that bill, and there's like that, actually, this isn't going to work for us. Let's talk more about that. That's easy to do because I greatly believe in our elections, and I want to make the administrative part of it as tight as we can, as pro-voter as we can. And it helps when we have a legislature that's on the same page for sure.
Yeah. No, and that's awesome. And that's one of the things that the Secretary of State and I were talking about a couple weeks ago, and it was in relations to the special session. And yeah, the special
fun to watch. It was fun to watch. I was up like at, 2 in the morning or something crazy. I don't know if it was a Friday, or I think it was that Friday. No, maybe it was a Saturday, waiting for Senate Bill 4. Like, what's going to happen? Are they going to add this? you know, and for us, it's like, and you understand this, it's, well, you're in the game, but you know, you talk about being a football fan of this, that, I mean, we are sitting there, we're texting each other, what's going on? Oh my God, can you believe they said that? Oh, it's amended. Oh,
Yeah.
that's kind of the flavor. And it's very exciting in its own way, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And this year, of course, because of COVID and everything, things were just so different because we couldn't actually be all there together all the time, and folks were watching virtually. But for folks who are watching the special session, there was a really important Senate bill that was going to work to support some of the public health issues that we're dealing with to make voting that much more easier in November. But there was all of these like amendments to the bill, one particularly related to letting open, kind of like an open primary, but it
Right.
was,
Basically, you could change your affiliation
yeah,
to vote during a primary versus Mexico currently has closed primaries. So, and when you think about it, that makes sense in a lot of ways because it's a nomination process, right? So it's like you almost have to pick a team to be able to nominate for November. Although, you know, I'm for, you know, I believe that if you're a taxpayer and you want to participate, you know, we have to be able to, we're smart enough to be able to find a way and to figure out details to do that. So.
yeah, and I think that was the thing that was just really interesting, is that in the middle of this entire debate, that was an amendment to the bill.
Where did
And
that come from? Where, I mean, I know who it came from, but like, how did that even happen? Do you
yeah, and well, it happened so quickly, but that's what's, I think, sometimes wrong with just the legislature is that conversations are had and things are brought up at the last minute, and then we're having to sort of scramble. And I think that's what happened when it finally came to the House, where it actually died for, I think, about an hour or two, because there were, on principle, people felt like they couldn't vote for that piece of legislation anymore because it included this new amendment. But in the end, I think what really compelled people to bring the bill back to life and then to vote and pass it is that the bill actually, in its in the spirit of what it was, how it was written, and what in its intention was to make sure that the folks who normally don't have the kind of accessibility that they need for voting were the people. This is what this legislation was it was going to support. So you have Native and Indigenous tribes who were going to have the ability to be able to vote in ways that they didn't have in the primary, especially because in the primaries, I know on Navajo Nation, so many people were left out of the entire process because of COVID. And so this legislation would provide the Secretary of State and the county clerks from across the state an opportunity to make voting that much easier for many places that are super isolated, super rural. And so I guess the question is too, Amanda, is that how much of the work that you're doing in Doña County, like how does that impact what's happening with other county clerks around the state? Because everybody kind of gets to have their own, I mean, everybody's pretty sovereign, right? They have their own autonomy when it comes to handling elections. Can you explain a little bit of what that is?
That's such a good question. It's very juicy in its own way, and I'll do my best to, you know, speak to my own perspective, and I won't overlay anyone else's, right? The thing about the county clerks is, you're right. There are 33 counties. There are 33 county clerks, and there's 33 different perspectives, and that's helpful in a lot of ways because, you know, I firmly believe that we have to have, you know, good partisan breakdown of a lot of different issues because it holds you accountable. It holds me accountable. When you think exactly opposite of me, you and I have to have a conversation. I have to figure out what's going on. What are you thinking? Why do you think that? Why is your worldview like that? Well, this is mine. Okay, well, let's talk about it. Part of the challenge right now in our political process is that it's absolutely here and absolutely there. Let's be honest, there's very few people that are on these ends. We're all kind of in here. We can't, And there's just like this narrative that we can't operate in this space. We have to be here or here. And as somebody who I like to think is a good communicator and has spent my life promoting like connections with other people and relationships, it's been very discouraging. And so when there's 33 different people and 33 different perspectives, it can cause its own kind of tension. Ultimately, we're all obligated to follow the election code. We just are. There's no, there's no gray area in that. And I think we do a good job of that. Now, how some of the elections play out within each of the counties, in terms of, for example, I will absolutely do everything I can to make sure we have drop boxes at every 40 locations on election day. If I have to get my husband's truck and take them there myself, we will do whatever we can to bring access to people, especially in the rural areas of our state, in which not enough people have invited in, not enough people have been felt like they belonged to the process, and so we're more obligated to make sure they're taken care of. Not everybody believes that drop boxes, need to be, prioritized. Not all, clerks necessarily. I've heard, several conversations happen when I'm doing some kind of advocacy where somebody says, well, how many chances are you going to give voters to vote? And my comment is, as many as I can. And if it's 100, I'll do 101. And if it's more than that, I'll do 102. Because if you start participating and you feel connected, you're much more likely to, and you feel invited in, and it's for you, right? Like some things, and you, I know I read some of your writing. I know you connect to this. Some things are for other people. They're not for us. That's for them. I don't believe that. It's for me too. It's for you too. So having said that, I think it's a fine line in finding some consensus in terms of how we administer elections while still maintaining, and adhering to the election code. A lot of it does depend on your perspective on participation. And I am considered likely probably one of the more, sometimes progressive gets a bad word, right? But the reality is I'm probably considered one of the more, if not the most progressive of the clerk. And that's good and that's bad, just depending on, your own perspective. At the end of the day, I'm responsible for administering elections and following the election code. And I believe that I do that. But I would agree that, if you think about how many, so you have Bernalillo, you have Santa Fe, and you have Las Cruces. We're the most populous, and we're responsible for a lot of voters. But we're not, we're 3 out of 33, right? So the conversations get good, and the conversations get interesting between the clerks, and they should, right? Because we continue to need to hold each other accountable and have these conversations on why we believe what we believe. And I always believe that I can back up what I believe with data. And I'm a researcher in my very core. So if you come at me and you say something about voters, I'm going to use this as an example. When I was working in school health, I would hear people say, parents don't care. Oh, they don't care about their kids like so-and-so does. And I would come out of my skin because I would say, you know what, there's a lot of things you can say. You can say things like, I don't agree with their parenting perspective. You can say things like, I don't believe that they do this like they should. You cannot say that somebody does not care about that kid. You cannot say that because it's just not true. So when people say things like, speaking of my child, you're gonna have to give me a minute. She's full of mud. Go. Okay, go on. Hold on just a second. Go on, you're fine. Just tell Dad. Sorry.
No, you're okay.
So when you talk about, that perspective and then you say, oh, well, they don't care. That's why they don't vote. I come out of my skin too. It's like, they care. Why would you assume people don't care about their community? Why would you assume that people don't care about who represents them or the issue, whatever it is? We have to find a way to tap into what they care about and how that in itself results in participation and being present and accounting for in terms of our electoral process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I really appreciate your mindset on that because I and this is one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, because in 45 days, we will be embarking in what many are describing as probably one of the most important elections of our lifetimes.
If
And
not the most, yeah.
absolutely. And I guess the question is especially when I was joking about this earlier with a friend about how, because I'm in between Gen X and millennial, and so I'm constantly feeling both sides of how generations of
And you grew up in a different community than this one,
yeah,
right?
I
So
mean,
it's
I
a
grew up
different
really
perspective too.
yeah, I grew up in a really rural place in the southeastern part of the state, and so but my dad he was born in the United States, just across from, just on the other side of the border. And he comes from a mixed status family where some of his family members were undocumented, and he wasn't. And so for him, voting, he took it very, very seriously. And so for me, voting has always been a big deal for me. Like, there's that movie on Breakfast Club where the nerd, he has a fake ID because he wants to like vote. And I mean, I don't encourage that to anybody, but
No,
that was
right, but you can connect to that on some level, right?
yeah, that was me when I was a little kid. Like, I couldn't wait to turn 18 so I could actually start voting. And so I know that not every young person feels compelled to participate in voting, not because they don't necessarily care, but they seem to feel like the system just doesn't work for them, or it doesn't serve them. Like,
Right.
what, in your role as the county clerk, like, what do your conversations with young people, what are those conversations like? How do they sound, or what do they look like in terms of trying to get them to not only understand the value in voting, but that it's just one tool in the entire toolbox, that we know that it's not going to be the one thing that changes everything, but that it can be such a powerful tool in what we're trying to accomplish, like within our own democracy.
So last spring, which was of course not this spring 2019, I went to, I think, every single high school in Doña County and registered eligible high school seniors to vote, right? And so because I have a background in working specifically with youth, they don't intimidate me like they may some people. You walk into a group of high school seniors and they're kind of over everything, right? And they have their phones out and they're just, and so that doesn't necessarily intimidate me like it would maybe the average person. And so what I do is I do an exercise with them and I have them all stand up. Let's say there's 50 of them. And then I say to them, okay, you represent how many people are in Doña County, right? 250,000 or something. How many people, and then I ask them, how many people do you think are registered out of this? And so eligible voters. And so I have half sit down, right? Because it's about half-ish, más o menos. And then I say, okay, how many people do you think then actually participate? They actually show up. And then we have half of them sit down, right? And then I say, okay, out of this one standing, how many of you do you think in your age range participate? And literally almost every person will sit down except for maybe, I always like joke, 1.5, you know. I said, okay, so I'm going to tell you right now, I'm making decisions for you. So that visual helps sometimes, but what I think also helps is I talk to them really specifically about policy. And I say, how many have utilized a school-based health center in your school? Because in Las Cruces, in this area, and that was my previous work with school-based health centers as well, is I know that we're one of the only places in the state that has a school-based health center in every single high school, which is pretty outstanding. And so some of them raise their hands. Now it's half mental health and half physical health, right? And so it's a clinic in their school they're able to utilize. And I said, who do you think decided? Do you think your principal decided that? Do you think your parents decided? Who do you think decided that you think your superintendent decided that you could have a school-based health center? I said, it was a school board. Guess who elects the school board? You all do. So you all use something consistently that is a direct reflection on who was elected. So I try to connect actual real policy and how it affects their lives. And I say to them, you have unprecedented access to information. we didn't have that. I mean, I'm 46, I'm Gen X. So, you know, 1999, I was like, woo, cell phones. These young people have grown up with these tools that enable them to look into candidates and issues. And hopefully they're navigated in a way that pulls out actual fact, right? Versus kind of the, you know, the other extreme. And so I challenge them that way. And so what I try to do is connect to the issues that they care about, whether it's their family. And, you know, my job isn't, in terms of how it is administered, is nonpartisan. So I say to them, and I put many issues out there that can be right or left, just depending on how you look at them. If it's climate change, it's what you believe is the right to life, family values. Is it, you know, our stance on immigration, whatever it is, focus on it, hone in on it, get information, choose candidates that support your perspective, and then see how it plays out. You don't always win, but you don't always lose. And, you know, consider all of those things. And so I challenge them in a way, I hope, that acknowledges their will, really identifies with their ability to bring in information and regurgitate it in a way that makes sense for their peers, and treats them with the respect that they deserve as young people. We very often disregard them because they're young and they don't know. But I have been continually amazed and inspired by young people who I believe are going to prop up this country and our democracy in ways bigger than hopefully we've ever been able to do. And, you know, I say that on the day after, you know, losing, you know, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who has been, you know, I'm not embarrassed to say that I cried last night. I'm not embarrassed to say that this morning I woke up heavy-hearted and really wondering, you know, what that means in terms of my 4-year-old daughter who's here playing sandcastles. But I know in 20 years it may want to do things that she's prevented from doing because of what's happening today. So I think we have to acknowledge young people as decision makers and support their beliefs and have faith in them. And I hope that comes across in what I do when I do talk to them. I'm going to tell you this coming Tuesday, I'm going to do something that's really fun. We haven't been able to do voter registration events, partly because we're so busy, but other reason because of COVID. So the New Mexico State University men's basketball team, who I'm a huge fan of, and I'm a season ticket holder, I have a good relationship with New Mexico State in general, but they contacted me because specifically the young men on that team are inspired to register to vote. And so on Tuesday, we're having a socially distant event in which I will be able to, all eligible, there's some international students, so they won't be able to. We're going to sit there and register, you know, these young men to register to vote. And I'm going to have the same conversation with them that I'm having with you. And Lindsay says this often, and I think it's a great analogy. You know, if you're not at the table, then you're part of the meal, right? And so it's a big deal for young men. Many of them, you know, many of them African American, right? I'm not the average voter. They're not necessarily either, right? And so that's part of that, is saying, yeah, actually you are. You should be there. So those kind of things inspire me, and I hope that I can relay that confidence that I have in them, and that they, you know, that they matter.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. And I got a chance to take a glimpse at the video that you posted last week around that.
So goofy. Yeah, it's so goofy. And so I'm like, good question, you know, because you know, but yeah, they're super fun.
No, that's awesome. And I'm really excited for that. And, you know, for folks who are watching, and I've got a question for you, Amanda, from somebody from Facebook Live, but I think it very much is aligned with our conversation that we've been having. Is Dylan asks, how do you both feel about lowering the voting age to 16 as it is happening at various jurisdictions around the country? I know here in New Mexico, we already have it that if you're turning 18 if you're turning 18 on election year, you can register to vote. What are your thoughts around lowering the voting age to 16?
So that was probably something I heard a couple of mornings ago, and I haven't given a great amount of thought. I turned it over in my head at the time. In New Mexico, you can vote at 17 if you are going to be 18 by the general election. But what I do know and what I can say about it in general is that the younger you are when you're engaged to participate, the more likely you are to be a lifelong voter. So based on that and kind of some of the preliminary information I have, I would definitely look into it as a, as something that we might consider, for sure. I think that we often disregard young people in a way that then turns them off to the whole process as they move forward in life. And so the idea of having them participate younger is not something that I'm opposed to.
Yeah.
What about you? Where are you on that?
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think even you bringing up the conversations that you've had at the high schools and young people understanding who actually makes decisions, especially when it comes to schools and school board elections. I certainly think that young people should have the ability to decide who gets to lead their school boards, especially. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree that that I am all for expanding voter engagement, and so that can be from a number of ways. Whether it's young people, I know that other communities have also, especially smaller municipalities, have allowed, like in places like Maryland, have allowed people who don't have citizen status be able to vote on much more local type of elections. I know that that's a very complex and very layered conversation to have, but I think when we're talking about voting, it's like, how are we actually using this as an opportunity to at least engage in conversations that are that expand voting, that make it so much more inclusive versus making it less inclusive for folks. For those that are watching, feel free to comment, leave your questions. We're here for another 20 minutes. But now that we are getting closer and closer, Amanda, to the elections, and because Doña County did have this big congressional race a couple years ago, you are now 2 years into your role as county clerk. What are some of the steps that we're taking moving into the election cycle come November 3rd? And then also for the folks who are worried or kind of stressed about COVID and what's happening with voter access, like what are some of the steps that the county clerk is taking to not only ensure people's safety, but also ensuring that every single person's vote counts come November 3rd?
Sure. So because of the 2018 election and some of the administrative challenges connected to absentee, the following, legislative session, there was the 400 plus page election cleanup bill, right? And within that had some really embedded in that was some very helpful things. One of the largest things is, as a county, if I have more than 10,000 applications, I am able to start processing, organizing, and qualifying absentee ballots 14 days in advance. Previously, it was 5. And so if you have, literally tens of thousands of ballots that have to go through a very finite process that's very specific, and how time consuming it is, that in itself was such a godsend. I can tell you, as of yesterday, in Doña County, are you ready for this number? This is a live number, although I don't know what the staff is doing.
Breaking news.
Yeah, breaking news. Doña County has had nearly, and just in applications, 18,000.
Wow.
So if you think about during that congressional District 2 race that you talk about, the CD2 race that was so high turnout absentee, there was a total of 8,500, well, there was a total of a little under 12,000 applications, and about 9,000 came through. 500 of those were not qualified for some reason or the other. But if you think about the amount of what that looked like, and we're already at almost 18,000 applications, I would not be surprised if we headed to 30 or 40. And if you also consider that in 2018, total turnout in person and absentee was 63, to say that I believe that we are going to go 30% turnout above what is average for a presidential election. So that will put us at, I would say, 80,000, 85,000. These are all guesstimates, you know. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope it's higher.
Yeah.
And so that change in itself will assist the election board. What I've also done is expanded our election board. There's this idea that somehow I'm sitting back counting ballots. Our staff is counting ballots. Again, one of the layers we have in New Mexico elections that is so great is that community members are the ones that are on these front lines. So they're at the locations and they're handing voters, you know, they're checking people in, confirming their identification. They're, you know, moving them forward. They're handing them their ballot. They're watching them as they put it through the tabulator. That's not county clerk staff, and that's not me. Those are community members. And they're made up of fair partisan breakdown at every single site. That's part of the election code. Yay. I mean, that's great. It's great for democracy. It's great for our community. But the absentee ballot board specifically is also made up of a fair partisan breakdown, right? But they are also the ones that process, that qualify the absentee ballot. So they're the ones that look at the exterior of the envelope and will confirm that there's, you know, what's the required information is, open it in front of this board, and then, you know, add it to the stack that's getting ready to head to the tabulator. Previously in the primary, we had 11, right? And we had about 13 or 14,000 absentee, if I recall. Ballots returned. We've expanded it to 40 community members. So that's pretty robust. I've heard, and I'm not sure if this is true, but I believe Bernalillo County has about 50, and they may expand it based on their absentee, but historically they've had 50. So for us to head to 40 and be able to have 40 people in our community who had to go through a very, you know, HR process to be a temporary employee, because they're going to start like mid-October likely. That is one of the things that we have done also. We've also very dedicated to, again, having those drop boxes at each of the sites. The larger sites will look a little bit different than the smaller ones. The larger sites will have hopefully someone that's outside of the building. It'll be fully staffed with a fair partisan breakdown of, you know, individuals that are securing and staffing it. We'll have signage that says, drop your absentee ballot here. And that way people won't have to go inside, especially those high profile ones. For the smaller locations like Radium Springs or Hatch, or, you know, some of those, you know, Chaparral, where we will have a drop box in a similar that will be staffed, but we will minimize the necessity of even waiting and or having contact with other people, and that's all COVID related, right? But it's also access related. I'm excited about the drop boxes because we have purchased ones that will eventually be able to be converted into the 24-hour secure drop boxes that they have, similar to Oregon and Colorado. There are layers of security that we have to have in those. You know, they have to be fireproof, waterproof, camera, security, you know, all these literally immovable. So we're not there yet, but we will be at some point. Another thing that we're going to do is do our best to have everything in terms of absentee the day before election day. So what we have to tabulate in absentee is just what we get on election day. That's why I'm encouraging people, if you're going to vote in person, please vote early.
Yeah. Please
vote early, not just for your protection, but also for the protection of my election staff, right? All of the election boards across our community. And if you're going to drop your ballot off, try to do it during early voting. We have 8 locations across Doña County. And know that if you're going to vote in person, we are asking that you wear a mask. We'll also be fully masked up, PPE. You'll have a popsicle stick to sign instead of a stylus that you know you can dispose of. And we are, you know, doing implementing all the best practices connected to disinfecting and making sure our sites are as clean as possible, including, making sure that we're doing our best to make sure people are 6 feet apart. So if there's anything else that we need to do, we will do it. We will do it not only to give access, but safe access for our voters. We do know, based on even the response right now, that many voters will be utilizing absentee. Many voters, and a likelihood that they're going to be dropping off their ballots is also very high. So we're making space to make that happen for them.
So when you ask or when you say when people are dropping off, does that mean that they actually have to go inside and drop them off?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, for example, the Doña County Government Center, when I say we're going to have we're going to have a drop, almost like a mailbox on the exterior that's secured and has staff, they're not going to have to go inside. So the challenge during the primary was that the line was out the door, and it just about, on election day. And first of all, I'm like, why didn't you vote early? Please vote early. But some people have their, election day, traditions, and I just want them to vote at the end of the day. But I saw them with absentee ballots in their hands, and I knew that they could walk to the clerk's office, hand them off. But we have to balance being compliant with law and giving that access, because they are not secured like we would want them to be. And they can't be open after hours, right, in terms of like dropping them off. And we do have to have them staffed currently. Mm-hmm. And that is, but again, for the larger sites, I can think of Sonoma Ranch Elementary. I can think of Doña County Government Building, City of Las Cruces, some of those larger ones that have thousands of voters. We're trying to do our best to make sure that they don't have to head into the building. And so it's quick and easy for them.
That's great.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I have, and I think is a question that I think many of us are asking on a number of different issues, is that COVID has unveiled a ton of different inequities from a number of different areas. I know that we've had conversations with other folks around broadband, like access to broadband, things like that. What are some of the things that you've experienced since COVID began that not only we have to address from a voting perspective, but that you think will actually be like it'll inspire new really cool ideas? Like, are there some innovative ideas that you all have had to come up with because of COVID, and that you think will become like this long-lasting thing beyond us getting through this global pandemic?
Well, I think the Dropbox is a good example of how necessity is the mother of invention. So last year during that large election bill, there was that provision made for Dropboxes, and it's like, oh, there was a lot of cost associated with them, right? To make something a secure, 24-hour secure Dropbox, which is different from what we're going to have, frankly, during our election this year, it's almost like in an ideal world. Well, this year we're going, how can we make that ideal world happen? And I think that is something that really has compelled us to really look at access issues COVID has. Mm-hmm. Like, what is easier and safer for a voter to get something in the mail, fill it out, and be able to drop it in a box when they're on the way to do their groceries on a Sunday morning, right? That's ideal in a lot of ways, and we can make it a secure process. So who knows how many years that would have stayed in law, that we would have been like, oh yeah, someday. Well, someday is now in terms of how we want to move it forward. So I think that is definitely, part of it, is that ability to be safe and participate. I think that part of what I've seen is a lot of advocacy groups, specifically connected to the southern part of our community, have become more active in advocating for and make sure that we don't forget those individuals who may not have access to Wi-Fi or computers or even cell phones, but they want to participate. So I've heard a lot of advocacy, and so that makes me think that their spidey sense is up. They're definitely invested. And so I'm thinking that in the future, perhaps we could have those drive-bys, or we could have, a mobile van in which we could take it to more rural areas and encourage participation, where we take it to them, right? And this would all be within the election code and following law. But I always say, like, policy is great because people are behind policy.
Yeah.
So a lot of times people hide behind policy, like, oh, we can't do that because X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, but guess what? Policy and law, those two specific things, people are behind those. So if we get the right people, who are also invested like we are and want to find ways, because I think we have unlimited ways in which we can serve voters. I look at places like Colorado. We could have a 70% turnout rate. We could have a 75% turnout rate in New Mexico. We could do it if we can start implementing more things that are voter centric. So I think about ways like that. I also think, maybe even, making Election Day a holiday.
Yeah.
Maybe making early voting start earlier. We could be voting now safely, right? Over the next 6 weeks or the next, whatever is until Election Day. And every county that is rural and or frontier, I think, has an obligation to start thinking about expanding some of our sites in general, right? So there's never enough money in elections, and people cost money, and locations and equipment costs money. But, putting our money where our mouth is in terms of allocating, because elections are historically underfunded. And our Secretary of State, regardless of who it is consistently having to go back to the legislature and say, hey, I need some more money. So if as legislators, they say we really want people to participate, then you really got to fund elections. And so I think that's part of thinking outside the box, is actually funding elections in a way that not only says we are going to prioritize you, but then again, provides the infrastructure to make that happen for those in leadership. Because at the end of the day, I can do 100 different things, but if I don't have the staffing and or funding to do it, then it's just, again, one of those pipe dreams that we're going to talk about, on this kind of venue, versus actually implementing it for the people of our community. And they deserve it. Yeah. They deserve it. And I believe that firmly every single day, which is why we work so hard, why our staff is doing mandatory overtime pretty much every single day, 6 weeks prior to an election, to make sure everything is processed and done before they leave. So that's the call, Angelica.
Yeah. Well, you can always count on me.
I know.
I think voting is important, so very important. And so you certainly have an ally in me for as long as I'm serving in the legislature. So
how is campaigning going, by the way? This is new for me in terms of, I was appointed in 2018, and I didn't necessarily I didn't in my mind have an idea that I wanted to run for office. I knew I wanted to do this job. It just so happened that doing this job involves running for office. So I was godsmacked in a lot of ways by some of the, some of the way that it's routed out. But you have much more experience in that. I know you have helped with campaigns. You've had your own successful campaigns. So how is that going for you?
I mean, I think for me, it's going well. I generally don't apply the tactics that others do in terms of, I mean, I want to give people reasons to vote for me or not to vote for me, but not in some of the dirty tactics that I think some of our parties get involved in. And I say this in terms of, like, this isn't just like, both parties are very much responsible for how polarizing things have become. And so I think in a race like mine, which is a very small district in District 35, I generally would hope that people find, like, I want people to know that know enough about me and what I stand for, that they're willing to make a decision based on that, and not
a narrative that is not accurate.
Right. And I think that as uh, like I knew people weren't always gonna love me. Like that was clear
One
from
thing
the
to
very
know
beginning.
it though, right? It's one thing to know it. It's another thing to actually, like, I've experienced this myself. And I think that's, I mean, you know, I'm going to have a camp, and we'll talk about this, you know, I'm going to have kind of a roundtable in the next couple of months with a lot of, you know, Democrats like myself who are on the ballot and who are already elected and or on the ballot, these real conversations about how difficult it is, right? And to be able to see the human aspect of who we are and how it does affect us regardless of, you know, we got to get the job done. We've got to move forward. But at the end of the day, I'm a person. And when you say things that are not true or maybe shaded with a hair of truth, and then you extrapolate something that is really not great, it's hard.
Yeah.
And I think we should be able to talk about that. And I think that makes us more, I think, real to the average person who is, you know, who are they going to vote for? Well, maybe they'll vote for somebody who, you know, is showing that part of them that is, it's okay to be vulnerable and say things are hard, but I will tolerate it because I want this job, and I want this job because I want to do X, Y, and Z for my community, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I agree 100%. I think a lot of the issues that you and I are talking about today, um, they're issues that it led me to want to run for this seat. It led me to want to, um, I mean, I don't get paid for this. Like I do it because I absolutely love, um, working with people and trying to figure out how to make New Mexico the kind of state that I've always envisioned. I mean, it's a place that I was born and raised in, and it's a place where I see so much potential and so much opportunity. And it's just a matter of like, how could we put politics aside for like during every legislative session so that um, we can actually get some work done.
Yeah, so this is the funny thing. So when you say let's put politics aside, and I think, what is the root of the word politics? And the root of the word is obviously policy. And then I think if we could just focus on how we have different perspectives, and then voters just make decisions on which perspective they most believe in. So it's almost like, let's bring the politics and policy back in instead of all of the other items that tend to make us dehumanize each other, right? And I'm not even saying one side or the other, right? Because that's kind of what it ends up being, here, when we're all kind of in here. But talk about policy. So if you don't agree with me, don't accuse me of something that's not true. Tell me what you would do differently and tell me why. And then maybe we can have that conversation. And I think, because I think the public deserves a more conscious and kind discourse.
Yeah.
I do. And that's a New Mexico thing. Like, we should be able to talk to each other. Politics in New Mexico is very relational, right? So these relationships are just these things that kind of bring us together. I think we can talk about things. And sometimes I think I'm in the minority in that. So I appreciate this dialogue where, you know, I venture to guess, Angelica, you and I don't agree about everything. I think it would probably shock some people, but we probably don't agree about everything. But I do know that I can talk to you about it, and maybe you can understand my worldview and vice versa. And then hopefully, like, at the end of the day, you know, we part as friends and it's still all good, right? Because I think that elevates all of us.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. And it's one of the reasons why the last 2 years I've rode my bike up to Santa Fe, because
I know,
part of it is because I've been able to like I have town halls in a lot of these different communities, because I want people to be talking about policy and not necessarily just about the polarization that exists. Like, I don't want people to just not talk to me because I'm a Democrat. Like, there are Democrats who don't even want to talk to me because they think that I'm way too far to the left or whatever, and that's okay. Like, I think we are rooted in the values in which we have been brought up in, and I think that there's a lot of values that we can all be aligned on, and it's just
Absolutely.
a matter of like, how does that look in terms of policy and all of that. And so we are down to like the last minute, Amanda, and I really
already. I mean, I tell you, I could sit here all day.
No, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your time. And one of the things I've had the pleasure of having some really powerful women be a part of this conversation, and I really am so excited that you were able to make time today. When it comes to COVID and your ability to like navigate the last few months, like what has been your sort of go-to like self-care when you're trying to just like get through the day, like what many of us have called like Groundhog Day over and over and over again?
So about 2.5 years ago, my husband and I simplified our life when we moved to the country. We had a big fancy house, and we decided our kid deserves some more of a, so I come out here. I have this area. My daughter has, she literally is making sandcastles. We have a small in-ground pool that's a lot of work, and it's old, but we were able to use it. And I grew up in an apartment. I grew up in an apartment. So when I'm out here, I think it forces me to recognize my place in the world and my privilege. And I feel immensely grateful that I have this space in the world in which I have peace and I am safe and I'm around people that I love and I can take care of them. And so that may not sound like a pastime necessarily, but it always grounds me and it's always humbling. And then it reminds me of those who are not in the space that I am, whether they're safe and whether they're happy and whether they're loved and cared for. And then it also always makes me double down on anything that I want to do, especially connected to, serving our community and making sure elections are safe and accessible and fair. And so that's my pastime, is having maybe a glass of Chardonnay on the patio with my people that I love and looking out at the North Valley of my beautiful community and feeling immensely grateful. What about you?
I ride my bike a lot. Yeah, no, it's where I find
you can eat whatever you want, so I'm super jealous. Although technically I could do that, but like you can pretty much, all those calories you're burning means like you can pretty much have whatever you want to eat, right?
I ride so I can.
Yeah,
I ride so I can eat. No, it's been my therapy. I ride every single night. And so it's that and my dog. My dog has been a really great companion, and so I'm really I have no complaints at the moment. So
right. So think in the big grand scheme of life, even in the challenging arena that we're in the challenging, I think, challenges that we have in our country, I still think I'm still deeply invested in it. And I know even being, a citizen of this country, I'm in a place at the table in which is probably in a very small percentage of those in the entire world. So, to always remember your place, I think is very humbling. And I don't mean your place in terms of, I mean like your my ability to navigate my world is and I have 5 dogs.
Yeah.
So those are also fun and hang out with me. They don't have Chardonnay.
I've been watching the one behind you the whole day, the whole hour.
Yeah. So we've fostered probably over 100 dogs, and these are the ones that kind of just so we call it the island of misfit toys. Like nobody really wanted them, so they're ours. No, but thank you for the opportunity today.
Yeah,
I'm happy to
thank you, Amanda.
Super fun. Hope people got good information, and they can always go to dacelections.com to get more specific information or call our office if they want to know something about. They can go to nmvote.org to make sure everything's up to date and good to go. And at the end of the day, we want people to participate.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Amanda. I appreciate it. Enjoy your Saturday, and please try to get as much rest as possible before
we're ready. We're headed there. Yeah. You too.
Yeah. No,
you too. Hang on to everything good and have fun on that bike.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Have a great day. Happy Saturday, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us.